In this WrestleTalk news, Ace Steel has been released following Brawl Out, a major star has returned to NXT, Pete's review of Dynamite, and more. Subscribe and enable notifications to Always On for daily wrestling news videos.
Support WrestleTalk!
Last night on AEW Dynamite, we witnessed the first footage of CM Punk and the first mention of the Elite since All Out's Brawl Out, with many people speculating that we may be getting some answers regarding the legal investigation surrounding said brawl involving CM Punk and Ace Steel having a good old-fashioned Donnybrook with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Now it appears that where there is smoke, there is fire, as Dave Meltzer has reported that Ace Steel, alleged biter of Kenny Omega, was officially released by AEW on Monday. This is the first bit of news regarding any repercussions from the brawl, with still no information coming out regarding the status of Punk or the Elite post-suspension. Punk is, of course, still recovering from a torn triceps and is not expected back in AEW until mid-2023, if at all. Other members of the incident, Brandon Cutler and Pat Buck, had already returned to work following their suspensions, and we will continue to provide any updates on the situation because this is simply the news story that will not die. On the other side of the Tuesday Night War, we had news that could be categorized as a positive and exciting, as the steady stream of main roster stars used to bulk up NXT's card included a major surprise return. In addition to the likes of Rhea Ripley, Raquel Rodriguez, and the Good Brothers, NXT also saw the return of former two-time NXT champion Shinsuke Nakamura, who made his first NXT appearance since TakeOver Orlando in 2017. Nakamura was the mystery opponent of Stax, Tony D'Angelo's right-hand man, with Shinsuke picking up the win with a pair of Kinshasas. Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select had correctly reported prior to the start of the show that Nakamura had been one of the names discussed internally for an appearance on NXT, but it remains to be seen whether this was just a one-time appearance or if the move to NXT is a bit more permanent. Nakamura hasn't been seen on SmackDown lately, with his last appearance coming on the August 26th episode where he beat Baron Corbin. Another interesting note from NXT is that we may have an idea of what's going to happen next with Austin Theory and his Money in the Bank contract. Theory doesn't seem like an ideal candidate to cash in his contract successfully on the main roster, considering that would involve him beating Roman Reigns in some form, and that simply isn't going to happen before WrestleMania 39. However, it appears that a different route may be in Theory's future. Also appearing on last night's NXT, Theory teased cashing in Money in the Bank on NXT champion Braun Breaker as the show went off the air. Breaker is scheduled to defend the title against Ilya Dragunov and JD McDonough at Halloween Havoc this Saturday, so it seems entirely possible that WWE could get themselves out of this Money in the Bank predicament in a more simple manner than originally thought. And now a hot tag to Pete for AEW Dynamite.
It's Wednesday, you know what that means. Wait, no, Dynamite was on Tuesday. I remembered that. Also, Ollie's ill today, so I'm jumping in for my thoughts on this special Title Tuesday episode of Dynamite, where they have titles on the line, which is different from another episode of Dynamite, I'm sure. The first titles to be defended were the Trios titles, with Death Triangle facing Best Friends in the latest installment of their feud. One title had already changed hands, with Cassidy defeating Pac for the All-Atlantic belt, but Death Triangle picked up the win here in a very, very fun match. There were some outstanding near falls here, and some wonderful storytelling. The crux of Pac's wins lately have been the use of the ring bell hammer, which he's used to cheat on several occasions. He went to use the hammer in this match, but Rey Fenix was the guy who stopped him, saying he didn't need the hammer to win. He just needs to be better. He is a great wrestler. And then absolutely proved himself right by just winning, by being great almost single-handedly. That is some great seeds being planted for the next chapter of Death Triangle's development, which could go any number of directions. Good stuff all round. The next title up for grabs was the interim AEW Women's World Championship, with Toni Storm defending the belt against Hikaru Shida. This was also a bunch of fun, with some great offense, many German suplexes, and some near falls that genuinely made me buy them as the finish. Storm got the win here with the Storm Zero, and after the match, the heels of Hater and Rebel beat up Storm to set up Baker's Beatdown. Baker's Beatdown. Baker's Beatdown. That sounds like a thing that they would trademark. But she was stopped by Saraya, who brawled off into the crowd. Riho then came out and got arguably a bigger pop than Saraya, which either speaks to how over Riho is, how much Saraya has gone off the boil, or how much more instantly recognizable Riho's music is than Saraya's. Backstage, it was set up that FTR will be facing Swerve in Our Glory next week. That could legitimately be one of my favorite matchups on paper right now, and I am very, very excited for it. Darby Allin got beaten up by Jay Lethal. And then we had my favorite thing on the show, when MJF confronted William Regal in the ring. MJF is continuing his incredible slow burn babyface turn with yet another career-defining promo to add to his arsenal, of which I think he has like 5 this year alone. MJF spoke on his time training in WWE, getting extra work and being under the tutelage of William Regal during that time, but Regal blew him off for being too young at 19 and said after 3 months of keeping in touch that he had other things to deal with and said he should only contact him once he got better, but in much more abrupt words than I just used. MJF said that that email alone made him want to kill himself because professional wrestling is his life. He was just a kid. But he said if he did, the naysayers would win. So he kept training, and now here we are 7 years later, and William Regal is nothing but a sad old man in MJF's company who hangs around with people who are more talented than he ever was. After the crowd showered MJF with an appropriate level of praise for that outstanding promo, they then booed Regal as he attempted to retort. But then as he continued to talk, the crowd cheered him again, as he himself fired up, saying he wanted to light a fire under MJF because when he was 16, 17, 18, he was working the UK independent scene and being beaten up by grown adults because that was the way you broke into the industry back then. If MJF only had an email to get him to that point, then he's had it easy. He wanted MJF to prove himself and do things the right way, because by cheating and hiring other people to do his work for him, he's proved nothing. Good God. What a segment. This is my storytelling. This is absolutely wonderful character development from both sides. You can clearly see their motivations and how this paid off later in the show as well. And you felt both of their emotions and their cries for help, the trauma they'd faced in their lives manifesting in raw emotion that spilled out into the microphones. It was just a beautiful segment from start to finish, and genuinely one of my favorite wrestling segments I've ever seen, and I do not say that lightly. This is exactly what I want from my pro wrestling, and this ticked every box. Masterful. The next title on the line was Dalton Castle challenging Chris Jericho for the Ring of Honor title, and Dalton Castle refused Chris Jericho's handshake at the start of the match. You know, they've established that there should be a handshake at the start and end of every match, but I think they've had more Ring of Honor matches subvert that expectation. Jake Hager on the outside got fired up because the boys took his hat. That's silly. I love it. The match itself with Jericho and Castle was great, some fun offense and a great finishing sequence which ended with Jericho hitting the Judas effect from out of nowhere. Commentary made sure to put over that whether he liked it or not, Jericho didn't cheat in this match and he actually followed the Code of Honor, which I thought was an odd story beat, and he probably should have continued his systematic cheating and all that. But then he decided to start desecrating Ring of Honor some more, with a tombstone to Jerry Lynn on the Ring of Honor World title belt on the stage, which was pretty rad. This was also fun. Christian Cage let everyone know that Luchasaurus is going for titles now, so watch out. The baddies can't find Jade Cargill's TBS title, and Jade threatens Tony Khan that she'd hold up 60 minutes of Rampage if she didn't get it back to her. And then we had the main event of Jon Moxley versus Hangman Page for the AEW World title. This was, of course, overshadowed by what happened in the finish of this match, but before we get there, both these guys put on a stonker of a match, starting off with a brawl before Moxley even made it to the ring. A huge moonsault over an entrance to the floor, a deadeye in the ring apron. Moxley started bleeding a few seconds into the match because of course he did. This was just two top wrestlers doing some top wrestling. But of course, there was the very unfortunate finish. From a King Kong lariat from Moxley, Hangman appeared to land on his head and seemed like he was knocked out. Referee Paul Turner acted immediately, spotting Hangman was out and immediately called off the match, with Moxley being the winner. It was a horrible bump to take and a dreadful situation as the commentary attempted to cover what was happening while Hangman was stretched out. I think everyone here acted admirably. The commentary, the referees, Moxley, the production, everyone was respectful to Hangman's injury without detracting massively from the end goal of the show, and also didn't hyper-focus showing shots of Hangman in the ring either. They panned away and tried to show other things. AEW put out a statement on Twitter to say Hangman had been diagnosed with a concussion and had been discharged from hospital, which is great news as it could have been much worse. Rest up, Hangman, and we wish you a speedy recovery. But the show didn't end there, as Moxley covered and cut a mostly seemingly impromptu promo on Hangman, how dangerous pro wrestling is, and then called out MJF, who entered with his chip and a referee, but instead of cashing in his chip then and there, he handed the chip to Regal and said he's actually going to face Moxley at Full Gear because, crucially, for the first time in his miserable life, he's going to earn it. What a payoff to the MJF Regal segment from earlier, with Regal's words of advice actually taking root in MJF and meaning he is doing things the right way, not wanting any excuses for when he becomes AEW World Champion. This is once again an absolute masterclass of storytelling and was a much needed pick-me-up after the unfortunate events at the end of the match. Overall, this was a really fun episode of Dynamite. It was of course marred by the end of the main event, but the fun matches elsewhere and particularly the MJF character development meant the show couldn't score lower than a 4 out of 5. I might even give it a 5 because that is like one of my favorite things I've ever seen with MJF and Regal. I'm giving it a 5. Screw it. It was great. Tempest and I will be doing the Dynamite podcast later today as well, so subscribe over there for that.
In this WrestleTalk news, Becky Lynch may be nearing a return, Carl Anderson is caught in a scheduling conflict, Luke's review of Raw, and more.